And here goes quite possibly the most unoriginal specialized opening I've ever done on the archive. Sometimes you really want to go for something a little more original and something that you can take a little farther, but then reality sinks in and something like this just becomes the more practical idea. And not only that, you knew what you were getting into seeing it, and of course, I knew that even then, so bet you didn't see that one coming. That smartass Ed. Anyway, this is Ben, obviously, from the archive, and this is the 18th regular episode of Archive, Backwards Masking, and that's my much prized mint vinyl copy original pressing of Appetite for Destruction. This is one of those episodes that, in theory, seemed like an absolute slam dunk. It had that absurdist edge, it had a conspiracy component to it, and it had a lot of potential for humor. So I was kind of surprised when this one was met with. It wasn't too bad, but it was more indifference than anything else. Um, and indeed, it's grown to be one of those episodes that I seem to be the only one that finds it funny. And not only that, it's one of those episodes where you see just how horribly unhip I am with my musical tastes, because this is pretty much an oldies extravaganza. I think there's one or two relatively recent cuts in here, but it was I don't even know where to begin with this episode. It was a very, very long, very tedious, very difficult, but also very funny episode to make, and a very enjoyable episode to make. Usually I can spit out an archive episode in 7 to 10 days, which I guess may seem like a long time to a lot of other video producers. But for me, with all the research I have to tend to do and footage scrounging and all that, excuse me, it becomes a much longer process. And then with this one, because I had to go and find stuff, not only to play backwards, but stuff that I could more or less discern something out of, it was a very long process. After a while, okay, so I'm a little... Now, how I discussed I guess you want to say the execution of this experiment, it's true. Now, I had been kicking around the idea of just taking my iPod and just putting it on shuffle, but there's a lot of stuff in my collection that is not on my iPod, so I figured, well, I want this to be as open as possible. I want this to be as close to actually scientific, I guess, as I can get. So, slightly contradicting myself, I would go to one of my big walls of CDs, like that one right there, and I would just, move my finger around, going round and round, round she goes, where she stops, nobody knows, and when I'd finish my little schoolyard rhyme, I'd just stop my finger, point to whatever CD happened to be there, pull it out, throw it in the CD player, put it on random, note what the song was, and then take it to the computer, rip it and reverse it, and listen to it 2 or 3 times just to see if I could discern anything. And unsurprisingly, I went through a ton of songs. That's part of why it took so long to make this episode, because I just could not find anything. But it was worth it to stick with it, because when I would find something, backwards masking is just chance. There is no satanic anything to it as far as I know, and I don't think anybody would ever be able to prove otherwise. So I would listen to something, and I know that the odds were that if I could discern anything, it would be nonsense. So that's kind of what I was banking on doing this, and sometimes I would hit something that would just make me burst out laughing. Like the one that stands out in my mind is the Pat Benatar song that I use in here, I Need a Lover. This S makes you sloppy, it makes me puke. So I thought that was good. But also I knew that a lot of it is just what your imagination comes up with, so there might have been just a touch of that going on. And of course the bit about Satan, well, yes, that is true what I say towards the end of the episode, that if you have the word and it's not terribly well enunciated, and there's some sort of sibilant sound nearby, you've got an extremely good chance that you're going to have something that could be misconstrued as Satan. Number 2. So if I might talk about Hell's Bells for a minute here, It'll save me from having to do commentary on that episode. That was the big springboard behind this, and it's also the reason why I generally won't touch religious stuff. So anyway, back on Hell's Bells, when I saw it, on the one hand, I thought it was absolutely jaw-droppingly hilarious, and on the other hand, it was probably the most maddening thing I'd ever seen. Because you had this host who you can't really tell if he really believes his own line or not, and some of his arguments are so utterly silly, and then just how deep he would dig to make his point. So you know that this guy was just sitting around probably for months on end just seeking out anything he could find and listening to it and possibly enjoying it just to sell some idea. So it's kind of weird. Anyway, with the religious stuff, I did the episode on Hell's Bells, but I generally don't like doing religious stuff because it tends to seem like a cheap shot. And I know a lot of people have axes to grind with religions and just religion in general. So there's that going on. And then for me, it's kind of the low-hanging fruit thing. I know it's kind of weird for me to say because I tend to tell a lot of very cheap kind of vaudevillian jokes, but I think there's a line where where it's meant in good fun and it becomes just an outright nasty swipe at somebody or a group. And so I try and avoid it. And I do have a couple of other religious videos that I might do someday, but I'd have to be able to figure out how to do it without seeming like I'm just sniping at it. Anyway, back on this whole notion of backwards masking. When I was a kid, that was right around the time of, maybe slightly after Hell's Bells and some of these other conspiracy theories, kind of the great second wave of if you play rock records backwards, they're going to give you satanic messages. Of course, you had it back in the 60s and 70s with just people, I think, doing it more for fun. And then you get around to the 80s and early 90s, and then you'd have some kid who would commit suicide or something, and it was supposedly because he was playing this evil record, not because the kid needed help or something. But when I was growing up, it seemed to be kind of going through another cycle, and I remember seeing some of those ads on TV, even though I really didn't care much for religious TV because, like pretty much any kid in the world, I found it boring. But I was well aware of it, and then I had inherited my older brother's stereo. So the first stereo radio whatever I ever owned was a turntable cassette unit, and I only owned a few cassettes, and I wasn't really much into music quite yet. But when I was 9 or 10 years old, for whatever reason, my family went to Best Buy, I think, one day, and like magic, there were 2 big boxes of vinyl records right there in the front of the store for 49 cents a piece, and I had my whole $1.50 allowance, and I picked up a couple records, namely just the stuff that I'd heard of, like there was an Elton John album in there, and I took it home, and I was a very curious kid. I tended to experiment with things and perhaps trash them a little. So, of course, having this idea planted in my head that if I were to play these records backwards, I'd be hearing this completely other set of words seemed like kind of an intriguing thing to me. So one of the very first things I did was I had an Olivia Newton-John album, of all things, in the 90s, and I was playing it backwards just for jollies to see if I could find anything, and I thought it sounded funny, but I didn't hear anything. So I had that going for me, and then I kind of drew on that whole outlook when I went back and made this episode.
And I thought you were cool.
I will say that this episode gave me a very big opportunity to just unleash my inner oldies geek. And indeed, I'm probably the only person out there geeky enough to make jokes about Benny Mardones. And she's just 16 years old. I mean, there's going to be 5 people out there that get that joke? Maybe. So maybe I kind of did myself in with this episode. Maybe I made it just a little too esoteric. Um, anyway, back on the making of this episode again. There was a commercial that I had found as I was making this. I don't know why. I guess I was just tired and I was putzing around on YouTube or archive.org or something. And I found this commercial for a laxative. And I knew I had the Hoyt Axton clip where he just sounds like he's trying to drop one, so to speak. And so I go looking for laxative commercials just to be a smartass. And then it was just God's little joke that I find one for Seritan laxative, which is nature's spelled backwards. It's nature's laxative. And it also says read it backwards on the label. I don't know if anybody ever really quite picked up on that. But, I thought it was just pure serendipity.
Words it's.
So admittedly, I really don't have 25 minutes worth of things to say about this episode, but I still would like to make one more point here before I wrap it up. And it's that lately it seems like I've been getting a lot of comments from viewers saying that I heard such and such a song at work today, in the store, on the radio, whatever, and I just burst out laughing. So I want to say, I feel your pain. And as that pertains to this episode, for me, the big one is the Pina Colada song by Rupert Holmes. If you like pina coladas, that one. And I cannot hear that one without thinking, yes, an alien must know. And at worst, I'll be in the thrift store or something, and they're always playing 70s and 80s stuff in there. I'll be flipping through a stack of records or a box of tapes or something, and it'll come on and I'll just lose it. So, like I said, I just want to say that I feel your pain. Making this show has had an adverse effect on me for a long time, so it's nice to know that I'm spreading the love. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it right here, and I'll see you again soon. And Ed, if you want to just magically cut to the credits.